All right, let's get into it. I'm going to try to keep it brief. I'm driving, so I got a little bit of time in between where I'm going and this conversation. So, 2 days in a row in these YouTube streets. You guys should be proud of me. I want to talk about gaslighting and biblical interpretation, because they seem to be running very, very, not parallel, perpendicular. There's a point, there's a crossing, there's an intersectionality between these things. So I want to start with this. Peter talks about there being no private interpretation of Scripture. That means that anything that somebody has, it should be able to be explained. So whether it's myself or somebody else, if we believe something, we should be able to explain it. I'm going to say this though. If you ask somebody to explain something, be willing to listen to what they're explaining. Hear it all the way through. I'm not so great at that at sometimes, because I'm sitting here trying to piece together where the logic is going, and I'm proficient in being gaslit, so I can see it kind of a mile away. But I want to say this. So things should always be explained. Whether or not you agree with them, that doesn't have to be the end result. So there is no private interpretation, meaning, well, this is just something that I have and nobody else can get. I believe that we all have the opportunity in prayer, supplication, in wrestling with something to understand something. But the thing that stands in between interpretation and what we currently hold as a belief is called cognitive dissonance. That you cannot filter what you're trying to understand through what you hold to already be true. In order to believe something, in order to believe something new, we do have to isolate or sit what we currently believe to the side and say, let me approach this with new eyes. Let me approach this with a fresh idea. And that can be very, very uncomfortable, because when we do that, we are literally placing some of our core beliefs to the side. Like literally to the side, and saying, I'm going to look at this with fresh eyes. I've done it in lessons you all have seen where, I've taught on love multiple times. Because if you don't understand something, or if you understand something in part, there's always areas to grow from it. The same thing is true when you're introduced to concepts. We often believe that when we are confronted with something, that how we figure out what is true is that we filter it through what we already hold to be true. It's not the truth. How we filter or how we come to something is to look at it with fresh eyes, to read it at face value, to see it at face value, and then see how that fits with the continuum, especially when we're talking about Scripture, with the continuum of how Scripture flows. There is a complete thought. There is a complete thing. Something being true does not mean that it's easy to understand. That is not a biblical basis for something being true. Some things have to be sought out with our whole heart, have to be revealed. The things that were revealed to the prophets were beyond, a lot of times, the natural human comprehension of what person would naturally walk away with. That's why we have certain writers and certain prophets and teachers in Scripture who reveal things. They reveal those things because they were called to sit with that. And once they sat with that and understood it, then they were called to teach it and explain it, to write it down, to put it in place, so that those who have an ear and those who are searching now have an interjection or a dialogue to help them better understand something. So, first thing, I said that, right? Setting something to the side. So let's get back to this gaslighting thing. What is gaslighting? The idea of gaslighting comes from, it's actually a movie. And in a movie, this man was pretty much driving this woman crazy, and I believe it was his spouse. And he was driving her crazy because he would do certain things, like turn off the gas in the house. Turn off the gas or turn off the lights in the house. And when she would go and investigate and see what was wrong, he would either restore the power or the lighting, or would tell her, I don't know what you're seeing. It's perfectly lit in here to me. I don't know what you're experiencing. It's perfectly warm in here to me. And cause this person to not trust what they were seeing, and literally drove her crazy. And so modern day gaslighting is based on that encounter, based on that interaction. And so when we're looking at scripture, we're talking about interpretation and private interpretation. There are some things that are lofty, and those things, you all know how I am. When those things are lofty, or when those things are difficult to be understood, we'll sit with it. We'll work through it, right? But when there are things that are on the surface reading is always the correct reading. Surface reading is always a correct reading. If you read something with your eyes, and it is very plain to be understood, even by a child, and then a person comes back through and says, oh, actually, no, that's not what that says. What that really says is this. If this is not done linguistically, and if you don't have linguistic balance, meaning you can't search it out for yourself, get a dictionary. Look it up, or don't have the discussion, because you can run the risk of being gaslit. You can be in a position where a person can be either more knowledgeable or have an interpretation and show you something that you don't see, you don't have the ability to see, and they can shift where you are. And you have a right. Every person has a right to say, I don't want to do that. And the person who's talking has a right to say, you know what? You're right, until either we're on the same page or till never. We don't have to continue this, because I'm not going to gaslight you, and I'm not going to be gaslit when we can see what's here on the surface. But far too often, there is a fine line between biblical interpretation and a person literally gaslighting or manipulating what is literally right in front of our eyes. It is better to say you don't believe or you don't agree with the Bible. Pick another faith, than to say what is actually there is not actually there. We cannot do that. We cannot, as a people, do that, because it destroys the fabric of Scripture, which then directly destroys what the goal for the kingdom is. The surface reading of the text is the most basic. The surface reading, that which is natural, is the most basic. And then, of course, we have the ability to then see the spiritual as we are given that ability by our Creator, by our Sustainer. Yah says that the hidden things belong to Him. We have to search Yah for the hidden things. But the revealed things, the surface things, those are an inheritance to us and our children. When we begin to manipulate the surface things, we will never make it to the hidden things. We'll never get to the hidden things, because the surface things are the blueprint toward the hidden things. And if you manipulate the surface things, then what you're going to come away with is a manipulated spiritual thing. And a manipulated spiritual thing is damnation. It just is. It just is. So I said that, and I kept it brief. We're under 10 minutes. We have to be careful when we're talking to people, when I'm talking to people, when we're listening to other people, that when we're attempting to understand something, that we're comfortable enough to say, I'm going to treat this with a beginner's mind. I'm going to treat this in a way that says, literally, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And I'm going to set it aside. I had my favorite person, it's not a biblical person, it's actually a person I know. My favorite person in probably the whole world was not in Torah when I came into Torah. And what that person did was the most commendable thing that I've ever seen a person do. I've seen other people do it, but it was my first time seeing it. And of course, the person had a belief system that they already operated within, and it made sense to them. And I remember approaching that person, or them approaching me, actually. I don't think I actually approached them, and asked me, what are you doing? What's so different? Blah, blah, blah. And I remember the first response was, well, I don't have a conviction on that. And by that time, I got to a point where I was definitely more open and listening and hearing where people were. And I said, you know what? That's right. Convictions are created through experience. And so later on, that person came back, and the person didn't say, I'm going to believe what you believe. I'm going to find what you know. I'm going to do. That wasn't that person's response. You know what the person's response was? I'm going to put down everything I'm doing, every food I'm eating, every holiday I'm keeping, everything that I believe I know. And I'm going to start at the very, very beginning of the Bible. Let's start at the beginning. Anything that I can pick up along the way, I'll pick back up. Anything I have to leave behind, I'll leave behind. And you know, it's been over 10 years for this person. And the things that they've left behind that were assumed on my part, right, to be contrary to the text, they haven't picked back up. And the things that they were unsure about, whether it was food, they haven't picked back up. They literally said, I'm going to strip everything and I'm going to read. And as I read, I will then begin to reestablish my faith. We all have to be willing to do that. We all have to be willing to do that. And we have to do it with the word. It's not something that somebody can necessarily show you or teach you, but I believe each of us has something that we're seeking to know and seeking to understand and seeking to dive into, but we're trying to do it through a medium that we already had. And it's not saying that you're not using the book or you're not using the tools that you have, but the mindset of saying, you know what, I'm going to approach this. You all know this about me. If you don't, then well, you'll learn it. I'm pretty radical in my approach to things. I will bungee jump. I will jump off the deep end. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of any teaching. I'm not afraid of any doctrine. I'm not afraid of anything, but I'm going to look at it so critical and so analytic, with the analytic lens, because we have all of the tools to do so. We have more information at our fingertips. We have more access through Messiah to approach the throne than we've ever had before, and to pray and ask Yah to see something and to have some truth as we approach it, but then ask for more, asking liberally. That is our right. We have a right to do so. We have a right to approach the text and to inquire and to ask questions. And we have to be comfortable standing on the truth if nobody else stands on it. Standing on the truth if nobody else stands on that truth. And we have to be able to literally trust that we're not going to get lost. We're not going to get lost, but we can't pick up things and add things to our faith and add things to our core beliefs that don't align. And if we are choosing to have those things, then we have to be willing to sit with them and allow other people to sit with theirs. So that's my spiel. That's my mind for today. Introspecting on my own ability to sit with things and to see things from other people's perspectives, but also looking at the reality that if something is plain, that plain thing, that surface thing is where you start. And until you fully grasp what's on the surface, you don't add anything else to it. You don't add another book. You don't add another belief. You don't add another interpretation. You don't add what is extra biblical, not extra biblical. You sit with that. And once you sit with that, then you ask, yeah, how do you move forward and build upon that thing? That is so very important. All right. That's all I got. I'm sure there'll be people in the comments and you'll have something to say and I'll respond. But I want you to think about that. I want you to think about not having your lens shifted as you're trying to read what's on the surface. And then after you understand the surface, then you pray to Yah to show you the weightier things. Shalom.